The reason why I've made the change here is for the sake primarily of thoroughness and honesty. That we may have together, you will understand in a moment of time, proper exegesis, the proper meaning of the text, in order for us to be established in His Word, having studied now the mysteries, for most of them having the mysteries behind us and so on. So what I want to do before I speak about the role of the women in the local church, because I'm just about done, okay, with that series of message of about 4 concerning the role of the woman in the local church. What I want to do instead is to offer you right now 4 to 5 weeks, probably 4, to introduce to you a person that you know, Paul the Apostle. Before I throw at you verses from his epistles and letters and so on here, so I would like us to discover Paul here, okay? Because what after this, it's women in the local church that is coming. And when we study women in the local church, we need to go through 4 principles concerning women in the local church. We need to go through the principle of subjection. You have time to come with me? We are introduction right now. Ephesians chapter 5, you know that. Find your book of Ephesians chapter 5. Principle of subjection, Ephesians chapter 5, verses 22 to 23a. Bear with me on this one. Wives, be subject to your own husbands so as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ also is the head of the church. That's the principle of subjection. Can you find Titus? You have 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Timothy, and then you have the book of Titus. Find them. They are in your Bible. It's a small epistle. Go to the book of Titus, chapter 2, verse 5. Chapter 2, verse 5. To be sensible, pure, workers at home, kind, being subject to their own husband, so that the word of God will not be dishonored. Subjection. That's 2 scriptures on it, same author. The next principle that we need to talk about in the month of September will be the principle of silence. Go with me in 1 Corinthians. Go back to 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 34. Go to Corinthians, the first letter. 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 34. The women are to keep silent in the churches, for they are not permitted to speak, but are to subject themselves just as the law also says. Go to the principle of teaching now. Go to 1 Timothy. Now you know where to find them. Go to 1 Timothy chapter 2:12. Go to 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 12 with me. But I do not allow a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man, but to remain quiet. Go to 1 Titus, not 1 Titus, but Titus, chapter 2, verses 3 and 4. Again, about the principle of teaching. Titus, chapter 2, verses 3 and 4. It says this: older women likewise are to be reverent in their behavior, not malicious gossips, nor enslaved to too much wine, teaching what is good, so that they may encourage the young women to love their husband, to love their children. That's all I want. That was the principle of teaching. Go to the famous 1 Corinthians chapter 11. No, it's not communion today. Go to 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 2 to 16. I'm just going to read verse 10 and see how we fare with this. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 2 to 16, you have the principle of what we call the head covering. Verse 10 goes like this: therefore the woman ought to have a symbol of authority on her head because of the angels. I'm done. 4 principles. silent, teaching, head covering, and submission. What is common to these 4 passages, or 5 passages, or 4 principles? Same author, Mr. Paul, that wrote these things. What's our feelings when I read just what I read right now? I wanted to respect the feeling of the people in both ways. What I wanted to do with us, it's respect the feeling of the hearers, which here tonight, it's you. You hear this, you did not hear me right now. Now you hear me. But what you heard right now is the scriptures. And it tweaks the heart. Whether you like it or not, whether you admit it or not, it's And the feeling of the teacher. Okay? Me, in that case. And believe you me, being here teaching on these things in a few weeks, it's also. Because if I tell you, Krista, just to pick on you, Krista, it's all cultural. It's an issue of culture of that day. Why would she trust me for teaching Deuteronomy? Why would she teach me to teach the life of the Messiah? Trust me to teach the life of the Messiah. If I have decided that the passage does a you label it as cultural to sweep it under the carpet instead of facing the truth. So, for a reason, simple reason of culture and society pressure, errors of the past teaching. Because if you have been told that these things were cultural of that day, and not cultural, I'm looking for another one, allegorical or whatnot, you have been falsely taught. Clear as this. It was not proper teaching. Because we will see the man, and I would like to discover the man. So once again, for the sake of thoroughness, we will do a study of Paul here, the writer of this passage, to understand where he's coming from to say these things. At least that's my desire. Instead of shooting this passage at you and saying, this is it and this is not it, pray for me that I will always come up with love, but I would like to introduce the man to you at length. To understand this man with a tremendous background, what I will be teaching, there will be some stuff new, some stuff old also that you know, that we may understand who is that person that wrote these letters for the churches, and does it apply to us today here in Duncan, British Columbia. We need to be honest, and with me, I'm not a perfect person, I'm under sanctification, but theologically speaking, I have a responsibility towards you, plural. It's to be honest and to be the closest to the truth as I can be as a teacher of the Word. Because I don't want to lose my credibility. I've lost a lot by doing things in the mistake that I did in my past. So, it's a character study that we will be doing for the next 4 or 5. I don't mean to rush it. You will like it. So I would like to encourage you to go through that with me. Because I don't want to be done in September concerning the teaching of the local church. If we need to go to the end of November, what the heck? I want to be thorough with you. And you will like the teaching of Paul and so on. So perhaps it's also to better respect God's choice. That's what I read to you. He is my chosen instrument to bear my name among the Gentiles. So to deny or to disrespect the words of Paul is to disrespect the words of Christ. We will see the meaning of an apostle. We will see what he saw. Do you know that this man was caught up in the third heaven? Did you know that? Yes. Good stuff. I will have no bias. We'll take it the basic principles in view, the basic principles that I would like to embrace with you. In that case here, it's a proper worship of God. If one of you, without looking at anybody, have lost the passion because of the age and the experience in churches, the passion or the desire to daily offer up an enhance, is that proper pronunciation of the word? Enhancing? Raise to a higher degree? Enhance? Yes. Enhance to a higher degree, the worship is dangerous. To be found in a place like this when you're no longer interested to raise the bar, not physically, but to raise the bar of what can be done, spiritually speaking, and more precisely, when we congregate together, it's worthless. May as well shut the door. I'm serious about it. Because we want to stay warm until the day of our physical death. And if we need something to be improved, let's do it together, beloved. To offer to Him, or to raise to a higher degree our worship from Him. So now that was the introductory material of what I want to do in 3 parts. The 3 parts, if you like notes, we'll look at his background extensively. We start right now. After the background, we'll look at his salvation from darkness to light. He was a man of extreme rigidity. If you know the word legalism, look at these guys, he was one of them. And then thirdly, we will look at Paul, the apostle of the uncircumcision, which is us, the name of the apostle and everything and so on, his missionary journey. And then we will feel a little bit more stable to respect or to make a choice concerning what he has given us. Because all the passage, beloved, that I read to you are Pauline. Pauline epistle. Paul epistle. We start. Make your notes as much as you can. I don't have an outline for now. His background. His background. So I'm going to go back quite a bit. His background goes back to Genesis chapter 3 at the fall of man. Okay? I have books in the back. They always picture Paul with the thing here. How do you call it in English? The circle. Oriel? Halo. Okay? Okay? They picture Paul like this here. But Paul was a sinner like you and I. Okay? He was plagued with the sin of mankind, passing on to all the imputation of sin from Adam here. It's good for all of us because we all identified or all been labeled with the sin of Adam here as the result of the fall. So Paul, like you and I, was a fellow that was born spiritually dead. We know that because of what he did. Resulting in 2 things being part of the fall that relies to you. Total depravity. What is total depravity? It's man is capable of every sin. In my sin nature, I am capable of every sin. And man is devoid of the love and obedience to God as demanded by the law of God. You need to understand this, that you cannot earn salvation by helping an elderly person to get off the car or sending your children to university. That's total depravity. Man is enslaved to sin from birth, and man is dead in trespasses. He needs to be reborn. A person being born, like Sophia, spiritually dead. Very much alive physically, though. But not sustaining because of the relationship, because of the sin passed down. That's why she will need to be evangelized. Let me say something about total inability from Paul. Total inability, man no longer has the power of contrary choice. After the fall, nobody can go back to God. Done. Separation from God. Kicked out of the garden of Adam and Eve, the Garden of Eden. Now all choices made by man here is in accordance with the fallen nature or state that he is in. And the state that he is in is a fallen state. He cannot by his own respond to God. And I want you to be with me because you cannot be more godly than Paul prior to his conversion. All of us together never did a half of it, of the style of worship and the stringiness that he had, being very stringy in the law and so on. But none of it was commendable to God. Okay? Cannot do anything that commend him to God. John 6:44 and 6:65. No man can come to me unless the Father draws him. And that's what was read to you, beloved, at the beginning, his conversion, when he was struck blind by the Shekinah glory. And you come to me here, and now you're going to serve me, and so forth. This is very important to understand that proper perspective on Paul. And you have noticed right now that I don't use the word Saint Paul. You can if you want, but you should not. Because he was not more a saint than you and I. It's more Roman Catholicism, Anglicanism, and different lines of faith that call him Saint Paul type of thing. You have the freedom to do so. You have the freedom. I wish, actually, I don't know why they do it, but we are all saints, actually. Paul would assuredly be more delighted in obedience to his word than to be called Saint Paul. If I invite him coming from behind the screen right now, and I ask him pass the microphone and say, Paul, what would you delight here, seeing in our local church? I'm surprised. I don't think Andreas, Andreas, would you call me Saint, please, Saint Paul? Because I wrote 13 epistles out of 27, so I would like to be called Saint. No. I know what he would talk about, in a sense. That was my first part. Where is he coming from? Are you still with me? Another 15, 20. Where is he coming from? Is from here. Jerusalem is right here. It's not from there. This is Jerusalem. This is the Mediterranean Sea. Those of the back is from here. Tarsus of Cilicia. It's a major city in Asia Minor. 10 miles from the sea only. A major center of attraction for the seaport and also traveling by land. It was mentioned first in 850 BC. And then it was taken by Alexander the Great in 334. It's a major city for university. You have at that place called Athens, Alexandria, and Tarsus. Paul, the doctor of the gospel, might have gone to a school in that place here. In 171 BC, Jews went there because of the war in Israel to help the economy in Tarsus. And in Paul's day, was about 500,000 population in Tarsus. Yes, 500,000 in Paul's day. Tarsus called his home Tarsus of Cilicia. It's right here. And his parent, according to Jerome, would have lived in Galilee, in a city of Galilee called Gush Halav, in Galilee. Yeah, they fled there because of the war of the Maccabees and so on, and Paul was there. This man had a sister. We learn about him. Is it interesting? Yeah. He had a sister in Jerusalem. Acts 23, verse 16. I'm going to read it. Acts 23, don't go, just listen. But the son of Paul's sisters heard of their ambush, and he came and entered the barracks and told Paul. So Paul had a sister in Jerusalem, and while he was receiving his training in the Pharisees there, he was probably, most likely, living with his sister there. He had Roman citizenship here. He was from a wealthy background, because to be able to buy the citizenship in Rome at that time, you needed cash quite a bit. He was known as Paulus. Paul. He never changed his name. Never. Okay? He was known by 4 names, but Paulus and Paul was the most prevalent. Very educated person. Doctorate. Beautiful, eh? Doctorate. Hebrew. He was speaking Hebrew, the Jewish community. He was speaking Aramaic. He was speaking Greek for the street people going to the market, and Latin because of the Roman citizenship. He was a short individual, was not tall. I like it, because Corinthians and all that stuff and Titus, it's not a fisherman that writes these things right now. Not that I don't want to demean them, because we have Matthew and stuff like that, but we're talking about an individual here that can show maybe a little bit more than 2 certificates. When you're trained under Gamaliel, that's theology indeed. But do you know how he named his theology? We'll see that later in Philippians. In comparison to be found by Christ. He was a short individual simply because Barnabas, that worked with him, was called Zeus. And Zeus was a very tall, bearded man, a false god, of course, but Zeus was tall, and they were calling basically Paul Hermes, Mercury, if you want, and Mercury was a short god. So that's how we know that Paul was a small stature. Okay? His bodily presence was weak. Was not the speaker, eloquent and so on. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 10, it says this. We discover Paul right now. 2 Corinthians chapter 10 verse 10 here says, "For they say his letters are weighty and strong." That's the case. But his personal presence is unimpressive and his speech contemptible. So you invite Paul to speak, stumbling over his word. Probably a French accent with this and so on. He was unskilled in speech for 2 Corinthians 10:10. His body was tattooed. Really? The law says that you should not mark your body? Of course. His body was tattooed. Galatian. Tattooed, François. Come on. Give me a break here. Tattooed. Galatians chapter 6 verse 17. Galatians chapter 6 verse 17, from now on, let no one cause trouble for me, because I bear on my body the brand marks of Jesus. He was beaten, stoned, shipwreck. Shipwreck at that time, when you go shipwreck on the ship, there is on the ship, there is nails and so on that hold the wood together and so on. That's the tattoo that he bore. And you know what? I'm a complainer, but that's the tattoo that I would like to bear also. Once you will be coming at my funeral, I would like to be have a word that a man that had suffered for persecution and so on. But he was a keen intellect, rabbinical teacher. Was part of his thinking. When you know about these guys, their way of thinking, they never answered a question, these guys, never. When you ask them a question, they answer your question by a question to make you think. So Paul was a man of a very high, keen intellect, following rabbinical logic. My third point is upbringing. Paul was a Pharisee. Like this, they are a branch of the Pharisees. It's a separatist, a non-conformist, a pious, if you want to. The Pharisees at the time of the New Testament, when you open the New Testament, they come from the period of the Maccabees, 171 BC, because when you finish the Old Testament in Malachi, for us, you never see a Pharisee, and as soon as you open Matthew chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, bang, they are all over the place. So they took birth, the Pharisees, between the two Testaments in 171 BC. The Pharisees, that's what they came to birth. For them, you study the Torah at the age of 5 from the house, okay? Based mainly from the house and from the school. They start to study the Torah at the age of 5. In the case of Paul, not in the case of Jesus Christ, at the age of 10, you study the oral law. Make a note of that. The oral law is the Mishnah. It's all the body of rules around the Mosaic law, and Paul was an expert in this. We will see that. At the age of 12, he get into a trade. Paul was not a carpenter. What was he? A tent maker. And at the age of 13, he received his bar mitzvah. And then once he was bar mitzvahed, he stayed in Jerusalem to study under a fellow called Gamaliel. When it says under the feet of Gamaliel in Acts 22:3, I can read that for you quickly. He was instructed by the best of la crème de la crème at that time, in a negative sense, if you want. 22:3. I am a Jew, born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in this city, educated under Gamaliel. Because a rabbi always teach in sitting position, like on the stool, and the students, they always have to be lower. They sit on the grass or on the floor. You're always at the feet of the person. Like Mary and Martha took the position of being trained and so on. Okay? It's a very intense education that he received, very high level of learning. Okay? We will see more about Gamaliel in a moment of time. Let's talk about his ancestral traditions. Always keep in mind that he's the one asking women to do things and not to do things and giving us the foundation of the church. Go with me in Galatians chapter 1 verse 14 for this one. Galatians chapter 1 verse 14. You have a person in the classroom that never bought a Chevy 4x4 Trailblazer in the past, a Trailblazer? 4x4? It's a truck, okay, called a Trailblazer. Okay, Galatians chapter 1, verse 14. This section is complex. I'm not going to rush it. François, what's that? I was expecting to talk about the head covering today. No, it's going to come, I promise. It's my commitment. I'm praying daily for the rapture to come before that. Daily. Oh Lord, would you take me? But I don't want you to be left behind. The reason is I want to show you the background of this person. I love this guy. He has quite a bit of a background. Loneliness, beloved. Loneliness. Amazing stuff. It's a section that bears complexity. And the reason for us right now is to better appreciate the person Paul. Okay? He calls himself in Galatians 1:14, come with me. We talk about his ancestral tradition right now. I was advancing, circle the word advancing in Judaism, beyond many of my contemporaries among my countrymen, being more extremely zealous for my ancestral tradition. That's the oral law. And the word advancing is trailblazer. It's the word in Greek, trailblazer. He was blazing trails in the oral law to build the fence around the law, which I will explain in a moment. But he was also in Acts 22 verse 3, like I said to you, educated under Gamaliel. And after his salvation, to go just a step ahead, go to Philippians chapter 3 verse 8, please. I jumped the gun right now because I told you that he owned quite a few of this, knowing the Pentateuch on the top of his head, mastering the Hebrew language, the Aramaic language, the Greek language, and the Latin language. All the religious language that a man like me would love to master. And look what he said about all that background. In Philippians chapter 3 verse 8, Stephanie. Look at this. Don't mean to be graphic here. More than that, I count all things to be loss in view of the surpassing value of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and count them but rubbish, so that I may gain Christ. It's as if I would start a fire right now, lit them up, crapology. That's my word for rubbish, but you know that is the word rubbish there in Greek? Manure. I count everything as down. 4 letters. Go down the drain. So the education, the stringiness, the legalism, building the law, the fence around the law, washing the letters 10 times not to have a speck of sand in it, and not watching this and tzitziot and phylacteries, he counts everything as crapology, as over against being known by Christ. That's why this man will not ask you to do anything impossible. He loves to see the beloved offer a worship of grace and freedom. We cannot count this man after he was basically found to be a legalist. Christ did the same thing. He rejected the Pharisees of that time because of their trailblazing and man-made rules here. Jesus did not dance the tune of Pharisaism. They wanted the Messiah to dance that tune, but Jesus did not. Now you will understand why Paul displayed a fragrance of persecution against the church and so on. And we will understand his zeal when he said, I was advancing and I was basically trained under Gamaliel. You will understand his zeal as in a negative way, if you want to. And now he has a more precious zeal right now that he has for you and I as we speak right now. And when he was on earth in 2 Corinthians 11:28, he says, after his conversion, I have a daily pressure for the churches at large. He was the type of guy agonizing for the church at large, for the better of his people. Writing letters, sometimes very hard to put in the mail for him, or press the button, send and receive, to send that email to the 1 Corinthians, specifically the first epistle. He became like a heart from the people. And he is the one that wrote everything that I have written for you at the beginning. I'm going to give you a little bit of a background here, very kindly, in a few words, and I will stop after this. 400 years before the coming of the Messiah, a new Judaism developed. We call it the Pharisaic Judaism. Okay? Not the Mosaic Judaism, because the Mosaic Judaism is pure. But the Judaism did develop 400 years before the time of the Messiah. And Paul was one of these guys in a moment of time. It's hard sometimes to read the gospel for you because, like I said a few moments ago, when you go to the Old Testament, the Jews, they finish it in 2 Chronicles. Us, we finish it in Malachi. And then after Malachi in your Bible, you have the book of Matthew right away. And when you open Matthew, you have Sadducees, you have Pharisees, you have scribes, and the whole shebang right there. And you have the word synagogue, which you don't see in the Old Testament time. It's because these things happen intertestament time, between the Old Testament and the New. I'm going to give you a historical background here right now. You know that the Jews went to, another 7 minutes. You know that the Jews went to 70 years captivity in Babylonia. Did you know that? Yes. Good. Okay, you know that from Jeremiah, Isaiah, and a lot of minor prophets. For disobedience to the law. Because they disobeyed the law, so they were sent into captivity here. When they came back from the Babylonian captivity and they went back to Jerusalem under leaders called Ezra and Nehemiah, specifically Ezra. Ezra started a school, a little bit like Francois started. I don't want to pretend to be a Sophrim or a Sopher, but Ezra, of the book of Ezra, started a Bible school. You can call it this way here. We call it the school of the Sophrim. Sophrim, it means a Hebrew word for teacher. It's one Sopher or two Sophrim. Sophrim is the plural noun for it. He said in his heart, in a story, because I can make technical, but it's a church meeting. He said in his heart, we need to get over the lack of knowledge of our people. A little bit like I do. The solid teaching has become rarer and rarer, so I have the same desire since I studied these things, and I said, that would be great to go over the lack of knowledge of the people in general, get sound biblical teaching, so that we may do what we ought to do. So the Ezra of the book of Ezra here started the school to go over the lack of knowledge of Hosea chapter 4 verse 6, where it says, my people die for the lack of knowledge here. And he started the school of the Sophrim, just to explain the law. Then this generation died, the generation of Ezra. And another generation undertook the task, but they took the task more seriously. They said, we need to build a fence around the law. You take a box if you want to, that box here, and you write law, 613 commandments. They said we need to build a fence around the law so that the people, they will break the fence, but at least they won't break the law. It was the school of the Tanaim, another Aramaic term for teacher. Tana. One Tana, two Tanaim, and the school of the Sophrim, when they stopped, basically, the Sophrim here, they last for 450 BC to 30 BC, but the second school that took the task more seriously, the Tanaim here, they started in 30 BC. Paul was one of them. The Talmud, but I don't want to speak about that now. Paul was one of the Tanaim. So, he was helping out to build a fence around the law so that the people may touch not the law. When the Sophrim was there, the mentality of these people was like this. I'm giving you precious information right now. It was the mentality, the law among them, was a Sopher can disagree with a Sopher, but he cannot disagree with the law. Fine. So the second generation, called the Tanaim, they said a motto, a Tanaim can disagree with the Tanaim, but the Tanaim cannot disagree with the Sophrim. So all the man-made rule of the Sophrim became of equal validity to the Scriptures, like it is to this very day. Because the Jews like this, they abide by the Mishnah. You don't abide by the law of Moses properly. They abide by man-made rule. And Paul was a Tanaim. He was one of them blazing trail, building the fence around the law. Then came another generation. They look at the work of the Tanaim. After the Tanaim was gone, they look at the word of the fence. They said there is way too many holes in the law. And they carry on building the fence around the law. These guys were called, it's after the time of Christ, the Amoraim. And their mentality was an Amoraim can disagree with an Amorah, but an Amorah cannot disagree with the Tanaim. So all the laws of the Tanaim became of equal validity to the Scriptures. And the work of the Sophrim and the Tanaim together give you the Mishnah, what they abide for to this day. And Paul was the builder of it. So if there is a man that understands legalism and not grace at that time prior to his salvation, he was one of the trailblazers. He was saved in 37 AD. So he was saved 7 years after the starting of the school of the Tanaim. So now of the Tanaim, now you understand his saying, but he says, I was more zealous than my ancestor. He was at top of the line, helping like Gamaliel, and having attended the school of Hillel also, helping to blaze trail and make the law way more difficult than it was. So when he heard about Christianity, he was off. And he went on a rage, persecuting them and so on. So that gives you a little bit the background of the man that will write 1 Corinthians, Titus, and so on and so forth. I have way more details than that to tell you, but it would be basically beyond our scope. How do they teach that, the Jews? I'm going to leave you with this. They teach because it's man-made, but they don't say it's man-made. They don't want to say that. They say that when Moses went on Mount Sinai, look at her gesture she does because she was basically educated in that kind of stuff. They say that when Moses went on Mount Sinai, he received not only one law, he received two laws. He received the law of Moses, and he received also the oral law. For centuries, it was all oral. Only oral teaching. They teach that God gave it, the oral law, to Moses. Moses, by oral tradition, gave it to Joshua. Joshua to the judges to the prophet, and the prophet to the Sophrim. So that's why to this day in Jerusalem, that's exactly what they teach the people about the oral law, the oral tradition here. It was not written before 450 BC and 200 AD. For 6 centuries, it was passed down orally. That's why they have a keen intellect. They have people that can memorize quite a bit. Because at that time, to afford a scroll of the Scriptures was terribly expensive. Here you go to Value Village in the bottom shelf, you can find a New American Standard worth $100 for $6.99. Not at that time. That's why they have keen intellect and the capacity to memorize. And when he calls himself in Galatians a trailblazer, that's what he's alluding to. He was blazing trails at the oral law that he was learning from the age of 10. He studied the Pentateuch, but the Mishnah for them is above the law. I have a quote to read to you. I don't know if I have it here. I think I don't, but I skip it. Yeah, okay, this is from the Talmud. This is not me. A judge must apply greater stringency to the observance of the Sophiric rulings than those of the law. What does it mean in English? It's more important to teach the oral law than the Mosaic law proper. Can we imitate that in a church? How many churches today obey more their constitution than the word? If it's not Mishnaic, please explain to me what it is. They abide by the Constitution instead of abiding by the rules of the epistles, the rules of the Messiah, and so on. I might take 5 messages, I don't know, but I'm not going to shorten them. Tonight, you have learned the background. Next week, we get into his conversion, what he was doing and what he became and so on. We're going to be learning about what is an apostle and so forth. Stay with me for these 8 to 9 until the end of the year, basically, if you want to, because we have to go to Feast also of Israel, which I stopped the regular program for these things. that we may, together, beloved men and women together, reflect and say, okay, I have been told for all my life that these things were alluding to the people of that time because of the disorder of the Corinthians, that this is not an allegory, but it was a culture principle, and allegorizing it. We will see if we should allegorize this or not, but first of all, my service to you was not to lash these things upon you, and although I will never impose anything, but what's dear to me, it's your information, that you may be well informed concerning these things, leaving behind what was taught wrong by what they say to you. It was a cultural issue. It's all there because of the pressure of society. Remember, older people, when you saw the first women in the force, in the police force, Gordon, you've been an RCMP. Remember 50 years ago, first time we saw it, a lady driving a ready-mix type of thing. Police, army. I'm not talking about good or bad here. But one thing that we need to understand is that the pressure out there in the world system has come into our churches. It's very pressuring. And I don't want to lose the amount of credibility that I have with you by shrinking on these passages. I have studied them intensely. You know that, and I know you believe me, and I need to pass on to you what is proper as over against the improper. Thank you so much for coping with me for the first message. Steffi, where are we? Song 87.